Hello, Jacksonites, and welcome to my next installment in my Spider-Man review series. Today, of course, with the cancellation of the Sam Raimi trilogy, we will be discussing the not really forgotten, but it seems like of every Spider-Man film that's out there, this is kind of the one that is the least talked about for different reasons. Um, Today we'll be talking about 2012's The Amazing Spider-Man, based on the original comic series that was the longest running series of all Spider-Man comics. Indeed. So, The Amazing Spider-Man is an interesting film for myself. But before we begin, hold on. The Amazing Spider-Man is, of course, a 2012 American superhero film based on Spider-Man. Uh, Development of this film, it being a reboot of the Spider-Man franchise, of course, followed the cancellation of Spider-Man 4 in January of 2010, ending director Sam Raimi's Spider-Man series that featured Tobey Maguire. Columbia Pictures opted to reboot the franchise with the same production team, along with somebody named Vanderbilt to stay on with writing the next Spider-Man film, while some guy named Sargent and some guy named Cloves helped with the script as well. During pre-production of this film, the main characters were cast in 2010. Designs were introduced from the comics, such as artificial web shooters. And the film launched a viral marketing campaign, among other moves, around 2011. The film premiered June 30th, 2012 in Tokyo, and it was released July 3rd in the US, 10 years after the release of the original Spider-Man. This film received a mostly positive reception, with critics praising Andrew Garfield's performance, the director Mark Webb's direction, and its visual style, James Horner's musical score, and the realistic reimagining and portrayal of the title character. The film was also a box office success, grossing $758 million worldwide, which was the seventh highest grossing film of 2012 against a $200 to $230 million budget. So yeah, and of course led to a sequel in 2014. Oh boy. The Amazing Spider-Man film is interesting for me because I didn't care for a long time. Uh, when this was coming out, I did not give a shit. I avoided seeing this movie for so long. I was so disappointed when Sam Raimi's series was canceled and discontinued. I was so bitter, so unhappy, and so pissed off that the Tobey Maguire series got canceled. And when this movie started coming out, people left and right were saying, "Hey, there's a new Spider-Man movie. There's a new Spider-Man film. You gonna go see it?" And I would say, "No, it's not Tobey. I don't care. It's not Sam Raimi. It's not Tobey. It's not in that same series. I don't care. This isn't my Spider-Man." Um, I just wasn't interested. And I had friends that were going left and right and seeing the movie and saying, "It's a good movie. It's a fun film. You should check it out." And I was like, "Nope, nope, nope. I don't care. I'm not interested. I don't care." Um, it was actually, so my roommate, who was living with me, old viewers might remember, there was a guy who was living with me and my grandparents in my early days of YouTube. He is a huge defender of these films. He's actually kind of anti-Toby. And he was telling me left and right, "You really should check these movies out. I think they're pretty damn good." It wasn't until 2017, around the time when Spider-Man Homecoming was coming out, when Sony was re-releasing all previous 5 Spider-Man movies in those fancy new green and blue DVD cases to commemorate the occasion, where I finally broke down. I was like, oh, fine, fine. God damn it. I'll check out The Amazing Spider-Man. So I did. I watched it about 2 days after I bought it from Walmart. And something happened. I dug it. I actually thoroughly enjoyed this movie. I was very impressed. It's not as good as, even though I rate this movie pretty high, it is not quite as good as Sam Raimi's movies, but trying desperately hard to separate this movie. It's so easy for me to compare this to the original trilogy, but trying my damnedest to separate that from this film. I was very impressed by The Amazing Spider-Man. And to this day, I've seen this film only 3 times, spread out over 2 years. I can honestly say that, yeah, I like this movie. I like it quite a bit. I think it's a damn fine superhero film and a damn fine Spider-Man movie. And of the Spider-Man franchise, I know it's not really a franchise because it has a whole, fuck it, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, because it's considered a franchise. There's like 5 different timelines. In terms of the Spider-Man franchise, The Amazing Spider-Man, the first movie, seems to be the one that's the most left behind in the dust. There are those that adore the original Sam Raimi trilogy. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 gets talked about a lot because it's considered to be one of the worst superhero films ever made. The 2 Venom films get talked about it quite a bit. And the MCU films also get talked about quite a bit, unfortunately. It seems like The Amazing Spider-Man... Oh, well, there's also Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which that's the one that's kind of hit or miss. There are quite a few people that talk about it, but it also just, at the same time, doesn't get brought up very much for some reason. But of the Spider-Man franchise, this is the one that seemingly gets the most left behind. And I think that's a shame. I think this is the most underrated Spider-Man movie of the whole series. Yeah. This is a damn fine movie. Very well made, very entertaining. And overall, it's just a very, very solid superhero film. I kicked myself in the ass for not seeing it earlier. With all that being said, let's get into the plot of The Amazing Spider-Man. The plot to this movie is actually pretty simple. What the hell? A young Peter Parker, this time being played by Andrew Garfield, discovers that his father, Richard Parker's study has been burgled. Peter's parents gather hidden documents, take Peter to the home of his Aunt May. Aunt May in this film being played by Sally Field, and Uncle Ben being played by Martin Sheen. Okay. They then mysteriously depart. Years later, a teenage Peter attends Midtown Science High School. He is highly intelligent, but very socially awkward and is often bullied. He also has a crush on Gwen Stacy, played by Emma Stone, whom also returns his feelings. Peter learns his father worked with scientist Dr. Kurt Connors, played by Rhys Ifans, I think that's how you say his name, at Oscorp in the field of cross-species genetics. He sneaks into Oscorp where he is bitten by a genetically modified spider. He then discovers he has developed spider-like abilities such as superhuman strength, sharp senses, agility, and speed. Peter studies his father's papers and visits Dr. Connors, who has only one arm. He reveals he is Richard's son and gives Connors his father's decay rate algorithm, the missing piece in Connors' experiments on regenerating limbs. At home, Peter and Ben argue, and Peter leaves in a teenage huff. And while searching for him, Peter attempts to stop a thief that Peter allowed to escape and is shot, dying in Peter's arms. Peter uses his new abilities to track down criminals matching the killer's description. He creates a mask and spandex suit to hide his identity. He also builds mechanical web shooters out of wristwatches to attach to his arms/wrists. At dinner with Gwen's family, he discovers her father is Police Captain George Stacy, played by Dennis Leary, who dislikes the new vigilante hero. Peter reveals his identity to Gwen and they kiss. After seeing success with the lab rats using lizard DNA, Connor's superior Ratha, played by that one dickhead from Irfan Khan, the one dickhead from Jurassic World. Okay, yeah, that guy. Ratha demands Connors begin human trials immediately. Connors refuses to rush the drug testing procedure and put innocent people at risk, but Ratha fires Connors and decides to test his serum at a Veterans Administration hospital. What an asshole. In an act of desperation, Connors tries the formula on himself. After passing out, he awakens to find his missing arm has regenerated. Discovering that Ratha is on his way to the hospital, Connors goes to intercept him. By the time he gets to the Williamsburg Bridge, he has become a violent humanoid reptile. Peter, now calling himself Spider-Man, saves the people on the bridge from Connor's attack. Following a battle in the sewers, the Lizard, as he's now known as, learns of Spider-Man's true identity and attacks Peter while he's at school. Nowhere to hide, Peter. Police start a manhunt for both Spider-Man and the Lizard. They eventually corner Spider-Man, leading Captain Stacy to discover that Spider-Man is Peter and lets him go to stop the Lizard. The Lizard plans to make all humans reptilian by releasing a chemical cloud from Oscorp's tower to eliminate the weaknesses he believes plague humanity. Gwen, meanwhile, creates an antidote which Peter disperses, restoring Connors and his victims to normal, but not before the Lizard fatally wounds Captain Stacy. Before his death, Captain Stacy asks that Peter avoid Gwen to keep her safe. Peter initially does so, but seeing as they're both unhappy, hints to her that he may see her after all. In a mid-credits scene, an incarcerated Connors speaks with a man in the shadows, who asks if Peter knows the truth about his father. Connors does not know and demands that Peter be left alone before the man disappears. Hint, hint, going into the next movie. And hang on, one more thing. Oh, man. My stomach. I'm hungry. So what do I think of this plot? I think it's pretty damn good. It's different than the first film. Well, I mean, it's supposed to be, but different in a good way. Well, I mean, that's an aspect that I'll say for one of my pros, but it's different in its own way. It still feels like Spider-Man. It still feels like a classic adaptation of the Spider-Man origin story. Um, Again, it's different, but it still feels not similar to Sam Raimi's movies, but it feels like, oh yeah, this definitely does feel like Spider-Man. This is well done. I actually can't really talk about what I think of the plot without going into one of my pros, but I'll just say I like it. I like it a lot. It's well done, it's well thought out, it's well written, well acted, and pretty damn entertaining. So with all that being said, let me go into my pros. Pro number one is Peter Parker, again played by Andrew Garfield. He plays Peter Parker as an intellectually gifted yet socially introverted teenager struggling to find his place in life ever since his parents deceased when he was a child. When Peter sneaks inside the Oscorp building where his father worked, and a genetically engineered spider bites him on the back of his neck, giving him his superhuman abilities similar to that of a spider's. Garfield described Parker as someone he can relate to and stated that the character had been an important influence on him since he was little. Garfield said in interviews, including one in which he was interviewed by Tobey Maguire, that when he watched the film Spider-Man when he was younger, he would jokingly recite Maguire's lines in the mirror with a friend who joked that he would never be a Spider-Man. On accepting the role, Garfield explained, I see it as a massive challenge in many ways to make it authentic, to make the character live and breathe in a new way. The audience really already has a relationship with many different incarnations of the character, and I do as well. I'm probably going to be the guy in the movie theater shouting abuse at myself, but I have to let that go, no turning back. And I would want to. After taking the role, Garfield studied the movements of athletes and spiders and tried to incorporate them, saying Parker is a boy spider in terms of how he moves and not just in the suit. He did yoga and Pilates for the role in order to be as flexible as possible. He described the spider suit for this film as being very uncomfortable and said that he wasn't allowed to wear anything underneath, though later clarified he wore underpants while in the suit. And Garfield explained that he had 4 months of training and described his physical roles on stunts as terribly challenging and exhausting. It shows. So, Andrew Garfield's Peter Parker is obviously, it's the same character, but it is very different from Tobey Maguire's version. In a good way, though. This version of Spider-Man is a lot more comically accurate. Not to say that Tobey isn't. He is in many ways, but a lot more in terms of his no, maybe not in the face. I think Tobey got the face down, but physique-wise in his body, Andrew is a lot more similar to comic Spider-Man. In the comics, Spider-Man is very lean. He's very skinny and not really scrawny, but he's very lithe. He's very he's very lean. He's got the body of a sprinter. And in this film, Andrew Garfield very much so looks like that. He also, now again, Tobey's version is also very intelligent, but they definitely up the scientific aspect of Peter Parker, and they incorporate the intelligence aspect of Peter Parker in this version of Spider-Man. It's actually been stated in the comics that Peter Parker has an IQ of 200, or no, 250 actually, which I'm pretty sure puts him on par, at least in the Marvel universe, with those of Tony Stark and Bruce Banner. That's cool. And again, it's different, but it's still Spider-Man. It still perfectly feels like Spider-Man. And it's much more comically accurate. More on that later, but Andrew Garfield does great. Even though I'm pretty sure he was in his late 20s when he did this film, Actually, yeah, he was. I think he was like 27 or 28. He looks like a teenager, and he talks like a teenager, and he acts like a teenager. When he's interacting with all the high schoolers in high school, he feels like a socially awkward teenager. And anybody can relate to being socially awkward because everybody at one point was socially awkward. And Andrew Garfield does a really, really good job. His chemistry with the rest of the cast is pretty solid, but more on that in a little bit. He's just a likable guy. You can't help but just watch him and just feel like you're already one of his friends. He's like Toby, but still different. He's just a very likable kid. And he plays Spider-Man very well. And you can tell that he's definitely he's trying very hard to come off like Spider-Man and Peter Parker. He's putting a lot of effort into the role, and I think he pulls it off pretty well. Pro number 2 actually is Uncle Ben, played by Martin Sheen. I was shocked when I saw Martin Sheen as Uncle Ben in this film. Before we begin, a word from our sponsor. Cherry Pepsi Zero. Now, I haven't seen very many Martin Sheen movies. I've seen his horrendously miscast role as what's his name? Jason Wynn in the 1997 Spawn film. Worst element of that movie. No, second worst film, or worst element of that film. I've seen him as Rose's dad in that one episode of 2.5 Men. And I think he was in Apocalypse Now. I've never seen that film, but I know of it. And I know that he is Charlie Sheen and Emilio Estevez's dad. But I was pleasantly surprised by Martin Sheen's performance. I thought it was going to be kind of bad. But no, actually, Martin Sheen plays Uncle Ben very, very, very well. They established this in the original series too, but Uncle Ben has even less screen time in the first Spider-Man film than here. He's actually here for quite a bit. He's here for the first 45 minutes of the film. They established that Uncle Ben is not very... Well, he says in the movie, I don't have a lot of education. He's very street smart, and he knows how to work with his hands. And here he does that very, very well. Martin Sheen does a great job playing Uncle Ben. And he does a great job just coming off like a very loving, very supportive, very not firm, but fair and understanding uncle. He cares a lot about Peter, of course. He wants to protect Peter, but he also realizes that kids are curious by nature. So he supports Peter wanting to explore more what happened to his parents. And he realizes that because Peter struggles to find his place in the world, especially with the death of his parents, he does his best to understand what he's going through. He does his best to relate to what he's going to, and he does his best to support him and love him all the same. Martin Sheen does a phenomenal, phenomenal job as Uncle Ben, in my opinion. And I actually almost did cry when he died when I first saw this film. I was so attached to Martin Sheen as Uncle Ben. Dare I say it, actually, I think he does better as Uncle Ben than the original dude did. Partially because he has a lot more to do in this film. So yeah, I really like Uncle Ben in this film. Pro number 3 is Kurt Connors, played by Rhys Ifans. One of Oscorp's leading scientific minds and former partner of Peter's late father, Richard Parker, who attempts to engineer a revolutionary regeneration serum to help regrow limbs and human tissue. But something goes wrong, and he is transformed into a large reptilian monster. While playing the 9-foot-tall lizard, Ifans was required to wear a CGI suit. Initially, a large stunt double was used as a stand-in for the role, but Ifans insisted on portraying the transformed character himself, which I really respect. You can tell that this guy is really trying hard to throw everything that he has into this role. When his chemistry with Peter is also very, very strong too. It's nice seeing two brilliant scientific minds working together to collaborate on a project. And you can tell that, well, he knows the secrets as to what happened with Peter's parents. You can see the regret and sympathy in his performance. And when Peter reaches out to him, he tries his best to be fatherly, not really fatherly, but like a mentor and a role model for Peter to look up to, as Kurt Connors. When he has injected himself with the lizard serum, after that point, he still has his intelligence, he still has his scientific knowledge, but you can see that his mind is starting to either A, be taken over by the intoxication of power, or it's the lizard itself as a separate personality taking over his mind and making him go a little more nuts. I think it is a mix of both. But and he's also becoming a little bit more mad. When he's studying himself and talking to his camera and recording all what's going on with him, is still intelligent, but he's a lot more crazy, and he's oddly just a lot of fun to watch. Ifans is definitely throwing everything that he has into this performance, and it's very, very strong. And again, his chemistry with Peter is very, very good. And just overall, I think the actor does a great job playing Kurt Connors. And moving right along, pro number 4 is the lizard. The lizard itself. I count him as a separate pro. I do consider the lizard to be one of my favorite Spider-Man villains. Though he is kind of low, I do think the lizard is a pretty good foil for Spider-Man. For one thing, lizards are, well, sometimes, lizards can be a predator to spiders. And I just think in general, because the lizard has a lot of abilities that can act as a pretty good foil for Spider-Man. And how the lizard is done in this film, I think is pretty damn awesome. In the original comics especially, how the lizard was portrayed, he's just like a generic like reptile that you think of when you just think of the word lizard. That comes to mind, only more humanoid and green, wearing purple pants. What's up with Marvel characters with purple and green being mixed together? Green Goblin is purple and green. Hulk is purple and green. Lizard is purple and green. The fuck? Whatever. Here, though, I like that, and also later incarnations of the lizard would have the lizard just looking kind of like Killer Croc from Batman, just being a humanoid lizard monster. Whereas here, how the lizard is portrayed, it's literally a humanoid lizard. It does kind of bring to mind the cryptid, the reptilians, a species of humanoid reptilian hybrids that supposedly exist in New York sewer system. And it's also kind of based on the other cryptid, the Lizard Man, which is a single humanoid lizard monster or reptilian humanoid monster. Um, but I really like the lizard's design in this movie. They don't incorporate just a generic lizard into the lizard's design. There's multiple different reptilian features that are incorporated into the lizard's design. He does have a humanoid lizard-like face. Like he doesn't have a snout. He doesn't have huge teeth. He doesn't have a like a row of spikes down his back and the top of his head. He just has a bald head with human slash reptilian like eyes, huge eyes, and he has a normal mouth but with a sunken in nose, and kind of a creepy lizard mouth smile. But he has the overall humanoid body of it, just a generic lizard man, and he has a tail. But he can also crawl on walls like a gecko, and he can smell like a snake. He doesn't like flick his tongue out like a snake, but he this is one thing I noticed on my last rewatch. He can open up his mouth and sniff and taste the air. He uses it only once, but I can immediately tell that's what they were going for, because a lot of reptiles, they can smell, but and this is something that snakes do. How a snake can smell when you see them like go with their tongue, they're literally tasting the air, and they're letting their tongue go up against an organ in their mouth called the Jacobson's organ. Now, I imagine the lizard in this movie doesn't have he has a tongue, but he's not tasting with his tongue, but he's opening his mouth and letting the air pass over his Jacobson's organ to taste the air. And just overall, the appearance of a humanoid lizard hybrid is pulled off very, very, very well, in my opinion. And also, the lizard isn't just a mindless monster. He still has his scientific knowledge and most of his mind as Kirk Connors. Like he's perfectly sentient as a lizard monster. Um, like he still recognizes people. He still has his memories when he's human, and he still has his scientific knowledge. Kind of, it's oddly funny to me, but it is also quite clever. When he's first fighting Peter in the school, they bust into a science room, and uh, the lizard tosses Peter through a wall, and then he picks up two vials of chemicals, mixes them together, and tosses it like a bomb. It's like, oh yeah, duh. He's still a scientist. He knows how to make makeshift weapons with chemicals. That's clever. That's cool. And just overall, I do like, for the most part, the lizard's design in this movie. And his role. He definitely is a good foil for Spider-Man. And he is definitely intimidating as well. So yeah, I really like the lizard. This movie made me a lizard fan. Pro number 5 is the humor. This movie is not quite as funny as the original trilogy, but there are moments of humor that mostly have to do with Spider-Man going around learning the ropes of being a vigilante. Like there's an opening scene when Flash Thompson is bullying some kid. Peter walks over, and he's just like, dude, come on, man, leave him alone. Flash, stop. Eugene, stop. And then Flash immediately just puts down the kid he's bullying, goes over and starts fucking with him. But another funny scene, when when Peter gets his powers, he's working in the gymnasium, and Flash and his basketball crew are picking on some other girl. Peter grabs their basketball, and because he can stick onto things, he's like, here, just take it. Now, at first, he's like being quick and speedy with keeping the ball away from him, but then he just holds it out and says, "Here, just take it." Flash goes to grab it, and he can't because Peter's sticking to it. And then he yanks it out of his hand and goes to that scene is funny in and of itself. But to fuck with Flash even more, he barrel rolls right past Flash and jumps to score a dunk with the basketball, but not knowing his own strength, he smashes through the basketball hoop and shatters all of its glass to pieces. And he stands there like, oops. It's funny. The funniest scene in the movie to me is when Peter first makes his spider suit, and so a good chunk of the movie, Peter is going after dudes with long blonde hair who maybe have tattoos because that's the guy that killed Uncle Ben. He's trying to capture him and send him to prison. There's a guy who hacks a car and he goes to steal it. Peter's already in there. And he's just cracking jokes with the dude left and right. And the guy asks him, "Are you a cop?" "Really? Skin tight, spandex, red and black suit, or red and blue suit. And you really think I'm a cop? Come on, dude. Have a bigger imagination than that." Because, as I've stated before, in the comics, Spider-Man is like prototype Deadpool. He's a serious wisecracker and likes to fuck with his foes. And Andrew does a much better job at that than Toby does, admittedly. And it's funny. It's legitimately funny. It's not like gut-busting funny, but you'll get some good snickers and chuckles out of it. It's good. Again, not quite as funny. This movie takes itself a bit more seriously than the last trilogy, but still, it knows when to have fun with itself. Pro number 6 is the science of this film. Now, actually, this goes hand in hand with pro number 7. The science of the film and the origin element / comic accuracy. The science of this film, I think, is pretty damn well executed. It's still fantastical. It's still like this is the same year as the Avengers, so the technology in this film is obviously pretty advanced, as far as I know. But still, the science of this movie, it's a bit like Jurassic Park. It feels believable and it feels real. It doesn't feel too fantastical. It doesn't feel too science fiction-y. But it's convincing enough to make you believe, this stuff actually looks pretty plausible. And also the origin story, like this does kind of stick to the superhero origin story, but it's so well done that you don't even notice because of how much more accurate this is to the original Spider-Man comics. Like the Lizard's origin, minus the Lizard in this film, he doesn't really have a family. Actually, no, he doesn't at all. That was a big element of the original Lizard in the original Spider-Man comics. But the Lizard's reason for wanting to grow a new limb is right out of the original comics. In the original comics, Kirk Connors researched the reptile's ability to regrow lost limbs. Specifically, many species of lizards are able to drop their tail as a defense mechanism and regrow it. Now he's trying here to take that ability and transfer it to humans so that they can regrow lost limbs. And how it's done here, in the original comics, it was fairly well done, but it was still very 60s comic booky. But here, it does still feel comic booky, but it feels more believable and it's a lot more plausible. Not like, I've said this before too, the Christopher Nolan Batman films that go so far above and beyond to be as realistic as possible, to the point where it's boring. Here, it is still very root. It's a lot more rooted in reality, and it's a lot more rooted in science, but it's still fantastical and still comic booky to the point where it's fun, but it's still engaging and believable. Again, I'm not a scientist by any means, but I could understand a lot of stuff that was being talked about in this film, and it's believable, and I think it's pretty well pulled off. Not quite the levels of like Star Trek or something like that, but the science in here is very, very convincing. And the comic accuracy too is much appreciated. This version of Spider-Man has web shooters. I've never really liked web shooters. I can get used to it, but I've just never been a fan of Spider-Man only having web shooters. I've much more been a fan of Spider-Man being able to shoot organic webbing as a natural ability that he has. Like in the Sam Raimi films. It helps there too that I was exposed to that, and then I was exposed to the web shooters, and I just was never really a fan of those. But here, I can get used to them, and the web shooters here still are well pulled off. They're not quite as gimmicky as they are in the next film. And I also like Spider-Man's suit here. It's not very comic accurate, but it's still more believable, and it's overall just a cool design. It also feels a lot more practical too, considering Spider-Man's eyepieces are actually made out of sunglasses eyepieces. This color, actually. I wasn't initially a big fan of Spider-Man's suit in this film, but I like it. It's different, but it's still Spider-Man. And it's a much more balanced mix of red and blue, whereas this one is predominantly blue. So I like Spider-Man's suit, and I appreciate the comic accuracy in this film, and I appreciate the more realistic science. It's great. You can definitely tell a lot of effort was put into making this film feel as realistic as possible. Well, being realistic but still feeling comic booky, unlike the Christopher Nolan Batman films. Pro number 8 is the action scenes. There's not a there's a fair amount of action in this film, but it's not quite as it is exciting, but just in a different way. Ow. Oh, one more thing about the comic accuracy. With Andrew Garfield's performance as Spider-Man here, he moves a lot more like a spider. He crouches low a lot more. He is very quick, and he's very agile, and he's very acrobatic. Quite a bit more than Toby was. And one thing I appreciate, in Spider-Man's first fight with Lizard, there's one scene where he tries to trap Lizard by wrapping him in webs. He literally crawls all around the Lizard's body while continually covering him in webs, and he crawls around him like a spider, just a four-legged spider. It's very believable, and it's cool. But the action scenes are pretty awesome. Spider-Man Peter actually, when he's first coming down with his powers, when he's trying to control them, he gets into a little fight on a subway. Not intentionally hurting people, but his powers are first coming out, so he's accidentally like smacking people and sticking to people and kicking people left and right. Then when he starts going on his vigilante runs, he first runs into a gang that's trying to rob some lady in an alley. And Spider-Man's beating the crap out of all the dudes and jumping around and being chased by all the guys when they see his face. Then he's capturing people with his webs left and right with his mask on. And then there's his very first fight, actually, with the Lizard on the bridge is a little short, but it's still pretty cool. There's Peter's first fight with Lizard, actually, I keep forgetting. Sorry. there's a second confrontation in the sewers, which again is a little short, and this is when the lizard knows who Spider-Man is, but it's still cool. Another aspect of this Spider-Man being a bit more spider-like, he creates a trap for the lizard in the sewers by taking inspiration from the Sydney funnel web spider. He goes to a big drain in the sewers where there's like 4 or 5 different tunnels. He fires 4 or 5 webs down each tunnel, and he all sticks them together to create a web. Sydney funnel web spiders do that because they're ambush predators. They use the webs as trip lines, so if something goes near their nest, they walk on the webs and they move inside the nest, and that lets the spider know there's prey, zip out and grab it. This is similar. Spider-Man creates that trap for the lizard so that when the lizard is supposed to come down the webs, the webs vibrate, and that's Spider-Man's cue to get ready to attack. Lizard gets around that trap, and he uses like geckos and other lizards to throw him off, but still it's cool. You can see these much greater spider influence. But then there's that, which again is a little short. It involves Lizard pretty much overpowering Spider-Man. The third fight between Spider-Man and the Lizard, this is the one at the school. I keep thinking this is the first one. It's not. It's the third fight. Is a bit more evenly matched. And this is where we truly get to see Spider-Man and Lizard just go toe-to-toe with each other throughout the school. And they're having foils for each other. Like Spider-Man's webs trip up Lizard left and right. But because Lizard is stronger, he's a bit more of a juggernaut. Spider-Man crawls on webs and then webs. Spider-Man crawls on walls and then Lizard crawls on walls. Spider-Man is more agile, yet Lizard is more strong, like physically strong. But still, because of how quick and agile Spider-Man is, he's able to outmaneuver the Lizard a lot more. It's a fun fight scene and pretty entertaining. And then there's the final fight. Well, there's a brief action scene when Spider-Man is cornered by police. He's using his webs and his agility to take out cops left and right and outmaneuver their fire until Captain Stacy pulls a gun on him. But then the final fight between Spider-Man and Lizard, again, is just a little short. But it's at this point when Spider-Man is exhausted and wounded, stupidly, that the Lizard is eventually able to overpower Spider-Man. But then Captain Stacy shows up and backs up Peter, and Peter is able to defeat the Lizard and cancel his doomsday plan. The action scenes are a lot of fun. They're well choreographed. The effects on them are pulled off very well. They're exciting, entertaining, and pretty damn well done. And this will lead me into the special effects. Being pro number 9. The special effects are pretty damn awesome. There surprisingly is one bit of practical effects in this film. When Kirk Connors initially injects himself with the Lizard formula, he passes out, and then he grows up. He wakes up, and he discovers his arm has grown back, but it's covered in like this sheath of reptilian skin, similar to snakes. But he takes off this sheath of skin, and underneath is a freshly grown human / reptilian hand. It's got a slight, like, pale greenish tinge to it. It doesn't have fingernails, but it's a real gooey, slimy, new regenerated hand or arm, and it looks cool. It looks believable. And I believe after Kirk Connors has makes me look like a unicorn. After Kirk Connors has, because he doesn't permanently stay as the Lizard, he injects himself with the serum, and its effects last 2-3 hours, I believe. But when he turns back to his human form, he still has patches of like reptilian skin all over him, and I believe those are practical. And that in and of itself is very similar to a real life disease, actually, that's known as ichthyosis. Ichthyosis is, I believe, I think it might be genetic, because I don't think it's contagious, but ichthyosis is a genetic disease that causes someone to have patches of rough, dry, scaly skin. It looks like reptilian scaly skin. And really, the only way to treat the patches is you have to have them surgically removed and have that person have skin grafts put on them. That's when skin is literally grown for someone in petri dishes and is put on someone in patches. It's usually reserved for someone who has burn wounds, but in that case too, also people who have skin cancer, because cut off the cancerous skin and then put a skin graft on them, your body accepts that new piece of skin. But yeah, again, goes to show the scientific accuracy and scientific influence into making this feel more realistic. But I believe those patches were like real patches of reptilian skin that were made onto the actor, what's his name again? Rhys Ifans' skin. And also talk about the effects. There's, aside from that practical piece, it's pretty much all CGI. Like when Lizard is fighting Spider-Man, it's all CGI. When Spider-Man's swinging through the streets, it's all CGI. And the Lizard himself is a motion capture CGI character, but it's all very, very good looking. It's not dated. It's not cartoony. Well, you can tell it's CGI, but it's still very, very convincing, and it's well animated and very smooth. $200 to $230 million was used very, very well. And also to talk about Rhys Ifans' performance as the Lizard, commenting on the technology used to bring his character to life, Ifans commented, "I had a green suit on and then this cardboard head and these small claws. Every time you see the Lizard, the technology is so advanced now that when the Lizard's eyes move, they're my eyes. If I frown or show any emotion, they're my emotions. That's how spectacularly advanced technology is." Ifan said that he voiced the man beast as well, explaining, "I'm sure the voice will be toyed with in the eventual edits, but when I was shooting the CGI moments, when I wasn't human, when I was Lizard, I looked at a crash test dummy in a green leotard thing. There are many moments when I had to speak to Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone as the Lizard." And his voice is slightly different. He's got the actor has an accent. I think he's British or maybe German. I can't really tell. But when he's the Lizard too, he does still retain his accent. Like you can still tell that it's Kurt Connors speaking, but it's a little gravelly and it's a bit lispy too. And he really pronounces his P's. Like this is kind of a meme. When Lizard captures Spider-Man at the end and in the final fight, he's holding both of his hands in one hand, and then he takes off his mask and he goes, "Poor Peter Parker." He really, really overpronounces his P's. It's a little funny. But yeah, all the special effects are very, very solid. There's a lot of CGI, but it looks really good. I see no flaws in the CG effects. I see no flaws in the green screen effects. It's all very, very well done. And two, there's a couple unique shots as well. There's a couple POV shots of Spider-Man swinging through the streets. In fact, when he first makes his suit, there's one POV shot of Spider-Man swinging through the streets, and he jumps onto a building that's all glass, and you can see through Peter's POV him looking at his own reflection. Like, that's a cool shot. That's something that we've never really seen before, but this movie did that, and it looks cool. Um, but overall, yeah, the special effects were pretty damn solid. I have no flaws, except for one thing. I'll get to that in just a moment, though. With all of these great things to say about this film, I have 2 nitpicks and I have 3 cons. Nitpick number 1, this is the one flaw I have with the effects. The lizard's face is a bit off. I see what they're doing with it. They're trying to showcase a hybrid of a human and a reptilian. For the most part, it's well pulled off, except for the fact that Lizard's face looks not really like a lizard, but a bit more like a frog. It's that human influence on the lizard, on the lizard aspect. I think if they gave him just a slight pronounced snout, he wouldn't look so much like a frog. I think they're trying to make him look a bit snake-like, kind of like with Voldemort from Harry Potter. He has a very small nose, and that was done to make him look more like a snake. So I see what they're doing here, but still here, and especially because the lizard's lips kind of stick out, like kind of like this a little bit, he looks a little bit like a frog, especially with him having huge eyes too. But I get over it. The lizard's design is overall very well done in this film, but just at times the lizard just looks a bit too much like a frog. And nitpick number 2, this was a big criticism that this film had. This film was it was criticized by the number of underdeveloped plot storylines, noting the film's deleted scenes. Now, I didn't know that until researching this film, but knowing that kind of does explain a lot. Mostly in the fact that Peter never finds the guy who killed Uncle Ben. And a good chunk of the film is Spider-Man going around and trying to catch the guy who killed Uncle Ben. But then as soon as the lizard shows up, that plot line is just kind of dropped. And also, Peter and Gwen Stacy's relationship feels kind of forced. Like, you see the beginnings of them having feelings for each other, but then all of a sudden, when Peter goes to have dinner with Gwen and her family, they're sucking face on their roof, and it just feels like there's some missing footage used to show Gwen and Peter becoming more attached to each other. It's not a huge problem by any means, and I didn't really notice it until it was pointed out, but I don't think it's that big of a deal. But still, and it's not like they were worried about this movie being long. This movie's 2 hours and 16 minutes. Why not just have those extra couple of scenes to flush the movie out just a little bit more? Again, not a huge problem, but is still noticeable nonetheless. But my first con is the generic music score. I hate to say this. This was the final American film to be scored by James Horner and released during his lifetime, 3 years before his death, June 22nd, 2015, from an aircraft accident, as well as the penultimate film for both production designer J. Michael Riva and one of the producers, Laura Ziskin, who died on June 7th, 2012 and June 12th, 2011, respectively. James Horner's music, I hate to say it, I was not impressed. The music isn't bad, but just overall, it's not very impressive. It's very generic. It feels nothing like Danny Elfman's music, which I know they're trying to do something different here, but just the music is really nothing special. Spider-Man doesn't really have a iconic theme used in this film. It just feels like generic superhero music. At least it is superhero music, and there are moments when the music is uplifting and triumphant and it makes you feel things throughout the film. So that's good at least, but still overall I was not impressed by this music score. I cannot remember a single piece of music used for this film. Um Con number 2, I don't like Spider-Man getting shot. At the end of Spider-Man's fight with the police, right before he goes to confront the lizard for the final time, he jumps away to start swinging, and George Stacy says, "Hold your fire," but then a cop shoots Peter and clips him in his leg. And for the rest of the movie, he's suffering from the effects of that gunshot. And it just feels like a lazy, artificial way to heighten the stakes between Spider-Man and Lizard, just to give fake tension to the film and give the Lizard a slight edge over Spider-Man in their final fight. It's just a little stupid and a little lame. But my final con, this movie started the trend of Spider-Man's hand-to-hand combat skills decreasing, as far as I'm concerned. Now, admittedly, I still haven't seen Spider-Man Homecoming. I haven't seen Spider-Man Far From Home. I haven't seen Spider-Man No Way Home, and I've only seen The Amazing Spider-Man 2 once. So maybe I could be wrong. But as far as my knowledge, starting with this movie, Spider-Man as a hand-to-hand combatant really, really went downhill. And they just started having Spider-Man rely more on his webs to defeat his foes rather than his fists and feet. Spider-Man is a very agile combatant, and he does use his webs a lot, but he still knows how to punch and kick. He has superhuman strength, after all. He can lift 10 tons, so he can put up a physical fight against his foes. But he's a very balanced combatant. He knows very well how to use his agility, his strength, and his webs to be a very tricky fighter. But with this film, now upon rewatching this movie, I was paying attention more. Spider-Man does punch and kick more than I initially thought that he did. But still, Spider-Man in this movie relies a lot more on his webs to combat his foes. He's trying to wrap up the lizard left and right in his webs, and he uses his webs to escape, and he uses his webs to trap the lizard and keep him at bay. And there's one at least. And this could be very petty, and I don't mind it in this movie, at least, nearly as much because A, he's still pretty inexperienced in hand-to-hand combat, but they wanted to play up more the spider influence on Spider-Man in this film, and it does show. And Spider-Man, one of Spider-Man's favorite tactics is whenever he's swinging around, he does like a drop kick to his foes to surprise them. He does that all the time in this film, and it's cool. And Spider-Man does punch and kick more than I initially thought that he did beforehand. Still, though, overall, now Spider-Man and Lizard are a bit more evenly matched than, like, say, Spider-Man and Green Goblin. But still, I do feel like Lizard does outclass Spider-Man just a bit too much in this film. It's mostly in strength. Not quite as bad as the first Spider-Man film, where Green Goblin is clearly way stronger than Spider-Man to a point where it's annoying. And overall, I've always felt that Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man is the weakest physically Spider-Man, because at least in the MCU, at least as far as I know, Tom Holland does punch and kick every once in a while. But here it feels like Andrew Garfield is Tom Holland is the one that has the most gimmicks and technology to back him up. But still, Andrew just feels a lot physically weaker than Toby. Um, Andrew's more willing to rely on his webs and agility to defeat his foes, whereas Toby is way more willing to punch and kick. That's what I prefer, though. So that could be a taste thing, but still, it is a noticeable problem for me. I could be wrong with the next movie, but from what I remember, because again, I've only seen it once, I think they even more so play up Spider-Man just relying on his webs in the next film. But surprisingly, that's all I have to say about The Amazing Spider-Man. So, final thoughts. This is a damn fine superhero film. I was very pleasantly surprised. The movie still holds up, which, by the way, this movie will almost be 10 years old this June, I believe. Yeah, June 13th. It's almost 10 years old. But this movie still holds up. It's a damn good Spider-Man movie. It's very enjoyable. It's very well made, and it's very entertaining. It's different than the Tobey Maguire films, but it's still Spider-Man. And I highly recommend this movie. I will be giving The Amazing Spider-Man a very solid 8.5 out of 10. It's a fun film, it's very entertaining, and it's a very good Spider-Man movie. So with all that being said, post your comments down below and let me know what you think. Hit the like button and hit the subscribe button and share this video with your friends. And join me tomorrow as I tackle the highly controversial The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Look forward to that. And as always, I will see you guys in the next video. And if you're trying to create a serum from lizards so that they can regrow lost limbs, don't rush into human trials, because the rat that they tested it on turned into a lizard rat hybrid and ate other rats. It's probably not a good idea.